The echo of Maria Santos's footsteps had become the soundtrack of her nights at Sterling Technologies, each step a reminder of the invisible world she inhabited. At 11:47 p.m., the executive parking garage was a tomb of polished concrete and gleaming luxury cars, the kind of vehicles that cost more than she'd earned in 5 years of cleaning these halls. She pushed her cart between the shadows, collecting the day's remnants from a world that barely acknowledged her existence. Her daughter Lucy was at home, probably still awake, despite her promises to sleep early, working on homework at their small kitchen table. The weight of 2 jobs and single motherhood pressed against Maria's shoulders like the heavy industrial vacuum she dragged behind her. But tonight, something was different, a cold dread that had been building since she'd overheard that conversation 3 hours earlier. Victoria Sterling's heels clicked against the polished floor with the rhythm of absolute authority, each step echoing through the cavernous garage like a countdown. The merger with Blackstone Industries hung in the balance, and this emergency board meeting could determine whether Sterling Technologies survived or became another corporate casualty. She clutched her leather portfolio tighter, the classified documents inside representing months of negotiations and the future of 3,000 employees. Her phone buzzed incessantly, text messages from board members, updates from her assistant, pressure mounting from every direction. The black sedan waited like a faithful guardian, its chrome gleaming under the fluorescent lights, engine already purring in anticipation. Victory was within reach. All she had to do was drive across town and sign the papers that would secure her company's future. "Ma'am, don't get in the car!" The words tore through the sterile silence like a siren, raw and desperate, freezing Victoria's manicured hand inches from the chrome door handle. Maria burst from behind a concrete pillar, her cleaning cart clattering behind her, eyes wide with a terror so genuine it made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. The janitor's uniform was rumpled, her greying hair escaping from its ponytail, but her voice carried the unmistakable weight of absolute certainty. Security cameras whirred as they automatically tracked the sudden movement, their red lights blinking like mechanical heartbeats. The garage's ambient hum, ventilation systems, distant traffic, the whisper of the city seemed to fade away, leaving only the echo of that desperate warning hanging in the air. Victoria's world, so carefully controlled and predicted, suddenly tilted on its axis. Rodriguez and his security team materialized from the shadows like phantoms, their training kicking in with military precision as they converged on the source of the disturbance. "Step away from Ms. Sterling," Rodriguez commanded, his voice a low growl of authority as he positioned himself between the CEO and the janitor, one hand drifting instinctively toward his concealed weapon. Maria's hands shook as she raised them, but her eyes never left Victoria's face, pleading with an intensity that cut through every corporate protocol and professional boundary. "Please," she gasped, her accent thickening with fear. "You cannot get in that car. Something terrible will happen." The other guard moved to flank Maria, their combined presence turning the parking garage into an impromptu interrogation chamber. But even as Rodriguez reached for his radio to call for backup, Victoria found herself unable to look away from the janitor's face, the face of someone who had risked everything to deliver a warning she couldn't possibly ignore. Rodriguez's hand moved with practiced efficiency to the radio clipped to his tactical vest, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade as he prepared to escalate the situation to a full security breach. "Control, this is Rodriguez in the executive garage. We have a code yellow situation with a potential threat to the principal." He spoke into the device, his eyes never leaving Maria's trembling form. The static crackle of the response seemed to amplify the gravity of the moment, transforming a desperate warning into a corporate incident report. Maria's shoulders sagged as she realized the machinery of corporate security was already grinding into motion, ready to categorize her as a threat rather than a protector. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her weathered face, highlighting the exhaustion of someone who worked two jobs to keep her family afloat. Victoria watched this transformation with growing unease, seeing how quickly a human being could become reduced to a security classification. "Ma'am, we need to treat this as a credible threat until proven otherwise," Rodriguez continued, his training overriding any consideration of Maria's obvious desperation, his voice taking on the clinical detachment of a professional handling a volatile situation. The second guard, Thompson, moved behind Maria with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to restraining people, his hands positioned to subdue without causing unnecessary harm. Maria's breathing became rapid and shallow, panic setting in as she realized her window of opportunity was closing, that her chance to save this woman's life was slipping away with each passing second. "I clean your offices," she pleaded, her voice breaking with the weight of her invisibility. "I hear things, I know things, please just listen to me." The parking garage had become a stage for two different worlds colliding, corporate security protocols meeting working-class desperation. Victoria felt the familiar tug of her scheduled meeting, the weight of responsibility and the pressure of time. But something in Maria's voice held her frozen in place. The executive sedan sat between them like a silent witness, its polished surface reflecting the harsh garage lighting in fragmented patterns that seemed to mock the chaos unfolding around it. Victoria's mind raced through risk assessments and damage control scenarios, her CEO instincts warring with an inexplicable intuition that this woman's terror was rooted in something real and immediate. "Rodriguez, wait," she found herself saying, the words surprising even her as they left her lips, cutting through the security chief's radio chatter like an executive order. Maria's eyes widened with desperate hope, her hands still raised in surrender, but her body language shifting from defeat to fragile optimism. The second hand on Victoria's expensive watch continued its relentless march, each tick representing millions of dollars and thousands of jobs hanging in the balance of her decision. But in this moment, suspended between corporate duty and human instinct, she made a choice that would change everything. Thompson's grip tightened on Maria's arm, ready to escort her away from the scene and into the kind of corporate legal machinery that could destroy her life with a single harassment charge. "Ma'am, we really need to process this individual and get you to your meeting," Rodriguez pressed, his loyalty to Victoria's schedule and safety creating an urgency that threatened to override her momentary hesitation. The distant hum of the city filtered through the garage's ventilation system, a reminder that beyond these concrete walls, life continued at its normal pace, oblivious to the drama unfolding in this sterile corporate space. Maria's daughter Lucy flashed through her mind, homework left unfinished on their kitchen table, a little girl waiting for her mother to come home from a job that barely paid enough to survive. "I have a daughter," Maria whispered, the words carrying the weight of every sacrifice she'd made, every night she'd worked in silence, every conversation she'd overheard while remaining invisible. Victoria felt something crack in the armor of her corporate composure, recognizing in that moment the universal language of a parent's desperate love. Maria's voice dropped to an urgent whisper, her words cutting through the sterile air of the parking garage like fragments of a nightmare she'd been carrying alone for hours. "Executive washroom, third floor, 20 minutes before your assistant called about the emergency meeting," she began, her accent thickening with the weight of fear and desperation. The details spilled from her lips with the precision of someone who had replayed the conversation 100 times in her mind, each word etched into her memory by terror. Two men, expensive suits, talking about removing obstacles and making accidents look natural, she continued, her eyes locked on Victoria's face, searching for any sign of recognition or belief. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, his training telling him to dismiss the ramblings of a disturbed employee, but something in Maria's delivery, the specificity, the genuine fear, gave him pause. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garage's air conditioning, a premonition that whatever was coming next would shatter her carefully ordered world. The name escaped Maria's lips like a prayer she'd been afraid to speak aloud. Project Clearwater. The effect was immediate and devastating. Victoria's face went white, her portfolio slipping from nerveless fingers to clatter against the concrete floor, its contents scattering like fallen leaves. Rodriguez had never seen his boss react with such visceral shock, her composure cracking like ice under sudden pressure. "They said the merger meeting was the perfect opportunity," Maria pressed on, her voice gaining strength as she saw Victoria's reaction, recognizing that she'd finally spoken words that mattered. Something about the bridge route, about remote access, about making it look like driver error. The parking garage seemed to shrink around them, the fluorescent lights growing harsher, the shadows deeper, as if the space itself was responding to the revelation of conspiracy. Victoria's mind raced through the implications. Project Clearwater was known only to herself and 2 board members, a classified initiative that could revolutionize their industry if it fell into the right hands, or destroy them if it fell into the wrong ones. Thompson released his grip on Maria's arm as he processed the shift in dynamics, his training telling him to reassess the threat level when his principal showed signs of recognition rather than dismissal. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said carefully, his voice taking on the measured tone of someone navigating suddenly dangerous waters. "Do you know what she's talking about?" Victoria's breathing became shallow as the pieces of an impossible puzzle began falling into place. The hastily scheduled emergency meeting, the insistence on using her personal vehicle rather than the company car, the specific route that would take her across the Millfield Bridge at exactly the time when traffic would be lightest. Maria watched Victoria's face transform from skepticism to horror, recognizing the exact moment when disbelief gave way to the terrible understanding that someone close to her, someone she trusted, had marked her for death. The echo of footsteps from the upper levels filtered down through the concrete structure, a reminder that the corporate world continued its relentless pace while they stood frozen in this moment of revelation. Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively back toward his weapon as he realized they were no longer dealing with a disturbed employee, but potentially with someone who had stumbled upon a murder plot. The scattered documents from Victoria's portfolio lay between them like evidence of a crime not yet committed, the merger agreements and financial projections suddenly seeming like props in someone else's deadly game. "The Blackstone merger," Maria continued, her confidence growing as she saw Victoria's recognition. "They said, once you're gone, once you're out of the picture, the deal changes, the terms shift, someone else takes control." Victoria's knees threatened to buckle as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Someone had been planning not just to steal Project Clearwater, but to eliminate her entirely, to stage her death as a tragic accident that would clear the way for a hostile takeover. Rodriguez stepped closer to Victoria, his protective instincts overriding his skepticism as he began to process the implications of what they were hearing. Maria's daughter flashed through her mind again. Lucy doing homework alone, unaware that her mother was standing in a parking garage, trying to prevent a murder, trying to save a woman who lived in a world so different from their own that they might as well have been from different planets. The weight of her invisible existence, of all those nights spent cleaning around conversations she wasn't supposed to hear, suddenly felt like the most important qualification she'd ever possessed. Victoria looked at this woman, this single mother who worked in the shadows of her empire, and realized that Maria Santos might be the only reason she would live to see another sunrise. Victoria's executive decision-making kicked in with the cold precision that had built her empire, overriding years of corporate protocol as she looked directly at Rodriguez and issued an order that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "Cancel the meeting," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands as she gathered the scattered documents from the concrete floor. Tell the board there's a security issue that requires my immediate attention. And Rodriguez, I want a full sweep of my vehicle before anyone else touches it." The security chief nodded grimly, already reaching for his phone to summon the bomb squad, his skepticism evaporating as he processed the gravity of his boss's reaction to Maria's revelations. Maria sagged against a concrete pillar, the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation beginning to ebb, replaced by the overwhelming realization of what she had just set in motion. The parking garage that had been her silent workplace for 2 years had suddenly become the center of a corporate conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Sterling Technologies. Victoria studied Maria's face in the harsh fluorescent light, seeing past the janitor's uniform to recognize the sharp intelligence that had pieced together fragments of overheard conversations into a coherent warning. The elevator ride to Victoria's penthouse office was a journey between worlds. The polished mahogany and brass fixtures, a stark contrast to the utilitarian spaces where Maria spent her nights. "Sit," Victoria instructed, gesturing to one of the leather chairs that cost more than Maria's monthly rent, her tone softening as she realized this woman had risked everything: her job, her immigration status, her daughter's stability, to save a stranger's life. Maria perched nervously on the edge of the chair, her cleaning uniform incongruous against the backdrop of corporate luxury, her weathered hands fidgeting with the crumpled tissue she'd pulled from her pocket. "You said you've been cleaning the executive floor for 2 years, Victoria continued, pouring 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher, her movements mechanical, as her mind processed the implications of having an invisible witness to years of private conversations. The office's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a kingdom of lights that represented the lives and livelihoods that hung in the balance of corporate decisions made in rooms exactly like this one. Rodriguez stationed himself by the door, his presence a reminder that they were now operating in a space between legitimate security concerns and potential corporate warfare. Maria's hands shook as she carefully unfolded the tissue, revealing hasty scrawl in pencil, numbers, partial names, fragments of conversations written in the margins and corners of whatever paper she could find during her night shifts. "I started writing things down 6 months ago," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper as she spread the makeshift evidence across Victoria's pristine desk. "At first, it was just because some of the conversations seemed strange, executives talking about things that didn't match what I read in the company newsletters, numbers that didn't add up." Victoria leaned forward, her CEO training kicking in as she began to see patterns in Maria's desperate documentation: financial irregularities, mentions of shell companies, references to offshore accounts that had no legitimate business connection to Sterling Technologies. The tissue paper evidence looked pathetic against the backdrop of corporate power, but Victoria recognized it for what it was: the careful observations of someone who'd been invisible long enough to see everything. Maria's motivation became clear as she spoke about her daughter Lucy, about the fear that had kept her silent until tonight, about the terrible choice between protecting her family and protecting a woman she'd never spoken to, but whose life she felt responsible for saving. The intercom buzzed with Rodriguez's terse report. "Ma'am, preliminary sweep of your vehicle shows evidence of tampering, specifically remote access devices attached to the brake and steering systems, designed to activate via cellular signal." Victoria's blood ran cold as the reality of the assassination attempt crystallized, transforming Maria's desperate warning from paranoid fantasy into documented fact. Maria closed her eyes, a single tear tracing down her cheek as she realized her worst fears had been confirmed. She had indeed overheard the planning of a murder, and her intervention had quite literally saved Victoria's life. "There's more," Maria whispered, her voice gaining strength as she realized she was no longer just a frightened immigrant trying to protect her job, but a crucial witness in a conspiracy that reached to the very heart of Sterling Technologies. Rodriguez moved closer to the desk, his professional demeanor sharpening as he began to understand that they weren't just dealing with corporate espionage, but with a carefully orchestrated plot that had come within minutes of succeeding. Victoria looked at the crumpled tissue covered in Maria's careful handwriting and realized that this single mother, working in the shadows of her corporate empire, had just handed her the keys to unraveling a conspiracy that could have destroyed everything she'd built and everyone who depended on sterling technologies for their survival. The pieces of the conspiracy began falling into place with the sickening clarity of a puzzle Victoria had been unwittingly assembling for months, each revelation hitting her like a physical blow as she processed the scope of the betrayal. James Morrison, her trusted CFO and friend of 15 years, emerged from Maria's fragmented notes as the architect of an elaborate scheme that had been hiding in plain sight behind legitimate business transactions. "The quarterly reports," Victoria whispered, her voice hollow with disbelief as she pulled up financial records on her secure terminal, cross-referencing them with Maria's observations about late-night meetings and suspicious phone calls. Rodriguez leaned over her shoulder, his security training allowing him to spot the irregularities that Maria's untrained but observant eye had flagged. Patterns of fund transfers that coincided with Blackstone Industries' aggressive acquisition attempts. Maria sat quietly in the leather chair, watching the two executives piece together a conspiracy she had sensed but never fully understood, her janitorial invisibility having provided a front-row seat to conversations that were never meant to be overheard. The office's elegant atmosphere felt suffocating as the magnitude of Morrison's treachery became clear, transforming years of friendship and professional collaboration into an elaborate deception. Morrison's financial machinations revealed themselves with surgical precision as Victoria accessed deeper levels of the company's accounting systems, each layer of legitimate business masking transactions that had been slowly bleeding Sterling Technologies dry. $37 million, she breathed, staring at the screen as the pattern of embezzlement emerged from the data, transferred through a network of shell companies over the past 18 months, all of them tracing back to Blackstone subsidiaries. Rodriguez pulled up security footage on his tablet, showing Morrison's after-hours access to the executive floor, meetings that had no official record but appeared regularly on the building's entry logs. Maria pointed to one of her tissue paper notes, a fragment that read, "BK Industries merger advantage," followed by numbers that now made terrible sense as the financial projections for a hostile takeover. The realization hit Victoria like a sledgehammer. Morrison hadn't just been stealing money, he had been systematically weakening Sterling Technologies while positioning Blackstone for a predatory acquisition that would have been inevitable once she was eliminated. Rodriguez's jaw tightened as he processed the scope of the operation, recognizing that they were dealing with corporate warfare at its most ruthless level, where murder was simply another line item in a hostile takeover budget. The assassination plot revealed itself with chilling elegance as they examined the technical specifications Rodriguez's team had discovered in Victoria's vehicle, military-grade remote access devices that could override any safety system and cause fatal accidents that would be virtually impossible to detect. The bridge route was specifically chosen, Rodriguez reported, his voice grim as he pulled up traffic pattern analyses and accident probability charts that someone had clearly studied in detail. Millfield Bridge at 12:47 a.m., minimal traffic, steep drop to the river below, perfect conditions for an accident that would be written off as executive stress and driver fatigue. Maria's testimony about the overheard conversation took on new meaning as they realized Morrison had been coordinating with professional operatives, people whose expertise lay in making murder look like misfortune. Victoria felt sick as she imagined the headlines. Tragic accident claims, rising tech executive, company stock plummets. Blackstone Industries steps in as white knight savior to prevent total collapse. Rodriguez began making calls to federal authorities, his voice steady but urgent, as he realized they were dealing with a conspiracy that crossed state lines and involved multiple felonies, including attempted murder and corporate espionage at the highest levels. The elegant office that had been Victoria's sanctuary now felt like a crime scene, every surface potentially contaminated by the presence of someone who had been planning her death while sharing coffee and discussing quarterly projections. The scope of Morrison's network became apparent as they dug deeper into his communications, revealing contacts within Blackstone Industries, offshore banking connections, and a timeline that showed months of preparation for the moment when Victoria Sterling would be eliminated and Sterling Technologies would be vulnerable to acquisition. "He's been planning this since the Clearwater project was first proposed," Victoria realized, her voice tight with betrayal as she saw how her closest advisor had been positioning himself to profit from her death. Rodriguez discovered evidence of Morrison's access to her personal schedule, her security protocols, even her preferred driving routes, information that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of her daily operations. Maria listened to the revelations with growing horror, understanding that her nighttime observations had uncovered something far more sinister than simple corporate fraud. She had stumbled upon a murder conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American business. The weight of her daughter Lucy's safety pressed down on her as she realized that Morrison and his associates would stop at nothing to protect their investment, and that her interference had probably marked her family for retaliation. Victoria looked at this brave woman who had risked everything to save her life and felt the crushing responsibility of knowing that her survival had potentially endangered the one person who had shown her genuine loyalty in a world built on calculated betrayals. Rodriguez's phone rang with updates from the bomb squad and FBI liaison, confirming that they were now dealing with a federal case that would require witness protection and resources far beyond corporate security's capabilities. The security footage that Rodriguez pulled up on the main conference room screen revealed James Morrison in a series of clandestine meetings that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it made Victoria's stomach turn with each new frame. There he was, her trusted CFO of 15 years, sitting across from Marcus Blackstone himself in the private dining room of the Meridian Hotel, sliding briefcases across white tablecloths with the casual ease of someone conducting routine business. "These meetings go back 8 months, Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with professional anger as he scrolled through timestamp after timestamp of Morrison's treachery. Victoria watched her friend, the man who had stood beside her during her father's funeral, who had helped build Sterling Technologies from a struggling startup into an industry leader, accepting envelopes of cash with the same hands that had signed her birthday cards and Christmas bonuses. Maria sat transfixed by the evidence unfolding before them, her cleaning uniform a stark reminder of the invisible world where she had witnessed fragments of these very conversations, never understanding that she was observing the planning stages of murder. The conference room's polished surfaces and corporate portraits seemed to mock the corruption being revealed on the screen, transforming the heart of Sterling Technologies into a gallery of evidence for Morrison's comprehensive betrayal. The depth of Morrison's manipulation became clear as they discovered his systematic targeting of Maria and her daughter Lucy, using the company's employee assistance programs and immigration liaison services to gather intelligence on vulnerable workers who might pose security risks. "He knew about Lucy's after-school program," Victoria said, her voice hollow with disgust as she read through Morrison's internal memos recommending enhanced background checks on cleaning staff and maintenance workers. Rodriguez pulled up Morrison's communications with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, revealing a pattern of false reports and manufactured concerns designed to create leverage over employees like Maria, who worked in sensitive areas of the building. Maria's hands trembled as she realized how thoroughly her life had been investigated and catalogued. Her daughter's school records accessed, their apartment lease reviewed, even Lucy's medical history from the company healthcare plan scrutinized for potential vulnerabilities. He told me that one word from him could have Lucy taken away, could have us both deported even though we're legal residents, Maria whispered, her voice breaking as she remembered the fear that had kept her silent for months. Victoria felt a rage building in her chest that had nothing to do with corporate competition and everything to do with a man who had weaponized a mother's love for her child. Rodriguez's expression darkened as he recognized the sophisticated intimidation campaign that Morrison had waged against any employee who might have overheard sensitive information, using Sterling Technologies' own resources to silence potential witnesses. The revelation of Morrison's psychological manipulation of Lucy sent Victoria into a cold fury that surprised even her with its intensity, as she discovered how her CFO had used the company's youth programs to monitor and control Maria's behavior. He volunteered to mentor children in the after-school program, Rodriguez reported, pulling up volunteer schedules that showed Morrison's regular interaction with Lucy, his presence in her life designed to remind Maria of her vulnerability. Victoria read through Morrison's reports on Lucy's academic progress, her friendships, even her drawings from art class. Intelligence gathering disguised as corporate social responsibility that made her skin crawl with its calculated cruelty. Maria broke down as she realized that every conversation Lucy had excitedly shared about Mr. Morrison, the nice man from Mommy's work, had been part of a systematic campaign to ensure her mother's silence about the crimes being planned around her. He knew exactly which pressure points to apply, Rodriguez observed grimly, recognizing the professionalism behind Morrison's intimidation tactics, the careful balance of implied threat and apparent kindness that had kept Maria trapped between fear for her daughter and knowledge of impending murder. Victoria thought of her own childhood, of the security and stability that her father's success had provided, and felt physically ill at the thought of Morrison using Lucy's innocence as a weapon against her mother. The after-school program that Victoria had proudly funded as part of Sterling Technologies' community outreach had been perverted into a surveillance and control operation designed to protect a conspiracy that reached to the very top of corporate America. Morrison's contingency planning revealed itself as a masterpiece of corporate warfare that accounted for every variable except Maria's desperate courage, showing how thoroughly he had prepared for the aftermath of Victoria's assassination. Stock manipulation, media narrative control, emergency board meetings to install interim leadership, Rodriguez read from encrypted files they had discovered in Morrison's personal server, his voice filled with disgust at the comprehensive nature of the betrayal. Victoria saw her own obituary drafted in advance, complete with quotes from Morrison expressing his shock and grief at the tragic loss of his dear friend and colleague, followed by his reluctant acceptance of emergency leadership responsibilities during Sterling Technologies' time of crisis. Maria listened to the details of her own planned elimination, an immigration raid that would have occurred within hours of Victoria's death, removing the only potential witness, while Morrison positioned himself as the grieving interim CEO working to stabilize the company during its darkest hour. "He had it all planned," Victoria said, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration for his thoroughness and revulsion at his complete lack of conscience, right down to the memorial service and the transition of power to Blackstone's acquisition team. Rodriguez's phone buzzed with updates from federal agents who were now moving to freeze Morrison's assets and coordinate with international authorities to track his offshore accounts and foreign contacts. The scope of the conspiracy had grown beyond corporate murder into international financial crimes that would require resources from multiple government agencies, transforming Sterling Technologies from a technology company into the center of a federal investigation that would reshape the industry's understanding of corporate warfare and the lengths to which some people would go for power and profit. The first alarm bell rang in Morrison's corner office at exactly 12:23 a.m., a soft chime from his secure computer system that indicated someone was accessing financial records beyond normal parameters, triggering the digital tripwires he had carefully installed to protect his operation. His fingers flew across his keyboard with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times, initiating protocols designed to wipe servers, transfer cryptocurrency holdings, and eliminate any trace of his involvement in what should have been Victoria Sterling's final night alive. The leather chair that had been his throne for 15 years suddenly felt like an ejection seat as he realized his carefully orchestrated plan had somehow gone catastrophically wrong, that Victoria was still alive and apparently investigating rather than lying at the bottom of Millfield Bridge. Rodriguez's security alerts were flashing across Morrison's secondary monitoring system, showing unusual activity in the executive parking garage, emergency protocols being activated, and worst of all, his own access codes being flagged for suspicious usage patterns. 3 years of meticulous planning, millions of dollars in preparation, professional killers on standby, and somehow a cleaning lady had managed to unravel everything with a desperate warning shouted across a parking garage. Morrison's hands shook as he began the irreversible process of activating his escape plan, knowing that within minutes, federal agents would be swarming the building and his window of opportunity would close forever. The secure elevator to the sub-basement server room had never felt slower as Morrison descended into the digital heart of Sterling Technologies, carrying with him the encrypted drives that contained not just his own criminal evidence, but the complete technical specifications for Project Clearwater, industrial secrets worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the right buyer. His reflection in the elevator's polished steel walls showed a man he barely recognized, the composed CFO replaced by someone whose desperation was etched in every line of his face, whose 15-year mask of loyalty and friendship had finally slipped to reveal the calculating predator beneath. The server room's climate-controlled environment felt arctic as he began the process of transferring terabytes of data to portable drives, his breath visible in the supercooled air as he worked with the frantic efficiency of someone who could hear his prison cell door clanging shut with every passing second. Morrison's secure satellite phone buzzed with encrypted messages from his Blackstone contacts, terse communications that made it clear his failure to eliminate Victoria had jeopardized not just his own operation, but an international network of corporate espionage and financial manipulation that reached into dozens of companies across multiple industries. The weight of hundreds of millions of dollars in cryptocurrency hanging in digital limbo pressed down on him as he realized that his betrayal had been discovered at the worst possible moment, when the money was moved but not yet secured, when the evidence was still recoverable, when everything he had sacrificed his conscience and friendship for was slipping away like data streaming through fiber optic cables. Victoria's voice crackled through the building's intercom system with the authority of someone who had built Sterling Technologies from nothing and was not about to let it be destroyed by treachery, her words echoing through the corridors where Morrison was attempting his desperate escape. "James Morrison is no longer an employee of Sterling Technologies," her announcement reverberated through the building's speaker system, carrying with it the finality of corporate execution and personal betrayal made public. Rodriguez's tactical team was already moving through the building with the precision of a military operation, sealing exits, securing elevators, and systematically closing off Morrison's escape routes with the efficiency of hunters who had cornered dangerous prey. Morrison could hear their boots on the floors above him, their radio chatter filtering through the building's ventilation system as they coordinated their search pattern, turning Sterling Technologies from his sanctuary into his prison. Maria's knowledge of the building's service corridors and hidden passages had become an invaluable asset as she guided Victoria and Rodriguez through routes that bypassed the main security checkpoints. Her years of invisible navigation through the building's forgotten spaces, now serving as tactical intelligence in hunting down the man who had threatened her daughter. The irony was not lost on Morrison as he realized that his own systematic intimidation of the cleaning staff had provided Victoria with the perfect ally, someone who knew every corner of the building that he had forgotten existed, every passage that didn't appear on the official blueprints, every hiding place where a desperate criminal might attempt to make his final stand. The server room's emergency exit led to a loading dock that Morrison had planned to use for his escape, but Rodriguez's team was already in position, their tactical lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness as they surrounded the building with the coordinated precision of a federal operation. Morrison's escape vehicle, a nondescript sedan loaded with false identification papers and enough cash to disappear permanently, sat tantalizingly close, but impossibly out of reach as he watched through the loading dock's reinforced windows. His satellite phone showed final confirmations from offshore banks, cryptocurrency transfers completing even as his freedom evaporated. Hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into accounts he might never live to access, as the walls of Sterling Technologies closed around him like a corporate tomb. The sound of Maria's voice over Rodriguez's radio, calmly directing the security team toward Morrison's location with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had spent 2 years learning every secret of the building, was perhaps the cruelest irony of all, brought down not by corporate rivals or federal investigators, but by the invisible woman whose daughter he had threatened, whose silence he had purchased with fear, whose desperate courage had unraveled 15 years of careful planning. Victoria's face appeared in the loading dock security monitor, her expression a mixture of betrayal and determination that Morrison recognized from the boardroom battles that had built their empire, but now turned against him with the full force of someone who had discovered that her closest ally had been her most dangerous enemy. The digital countdown on his laptop showed the final cryptocurrency transfer completing $847 million successfully moved to accounts in 12 countries, just as the loading dock's steel doors began their slow, inexorable opening to admit the federal agents who would ensure he never saw a penny of his betrayal's profit. The server room had become Morrison's digital fortress, banks of humming processors creating a labyrinth of steel and cable where he made his desperate final stand, the blue glow of status lights painting his face in ghostly hues as he worked frantically to complete the data transfer that would secure his financial future. Victoria's voice echoed through the building's intercom system one final time before she cut the connection, her words carrying the weight of 15 years of friendship turned to ash. "James, I know you can hear me, and I want you to know that I trusted you with everything." The server room's reinforced door was designed to protect Sterling Technologies' most sensitive data from corporate espionage, but now it served as Morrison's last barrier against the justice closing in around him. The electromagnetic locks that had once secured the company's secrets, now trapping him in a prison of his own making. Rodriguez positioned his team with tactical precision outside the server room, their equipment showing heat signatures and movement patterns that confirmed Morrison was alone but armed, cornered like a wounded animal in the very heart of the company he had tried to destroy. Maria stood beside Victoria in the corridor outside, her cleaning uniform a stark reminder of the invisible world that had ultimately brought Morrison's empire of lies crashing down. Her quiet dignity contrasting sharply with the chaos her courage had unleashed. The server room's environmental controls hummed with mechanical indifference as they maintained the perfect temperature for the computers that Morrison was systematically destroying, wiping terabytes of evidence even as he knew his escape was impossible. Morrison's voice crackled through the server room's intercom speakers with the bitter edge of a man who had gambled everything and lost, his words carrying 15 years of accumulated resentment and jealousy that had finally found their target. "You never deserved it, Victoria," he snarled, his composure finally cracking to reveal the envy that had festered beneath years of loyal service and friendly conversation. "Your father's company, your inherited wealth, your unearned position at the top, while people like me did all the real work." Rodriguez signaled his team to hold position as Morrison's psychological breakdown continued, recognizing that desperate men with nothing to lose were capable of destroying everything within their reach out of spite. Victoria felt each word like a physical blow, understanding that the friend she had trusted with her life had been nurturing this hatred for years, smiling at board meetings while plotting her destruction and the theft of everything she had worked to build. Maria listened to Morrison's rant with the quiet attention of someone who had spent years being invisible, while powerful people revealed their true natures. Her presence a reminder that sometimes the most important witnesses are the ones no one thinks to notice. The server room's backup power systems kicked in as Morrison began his final act of sabotage. Emergency lighting bathing the corridor in harsh red illumination that made the confrontation feel like a scene from a digital apocalypse. Rodriguez's tactical radio crackled with updates from the FBI teams surrounding the building, confirming that Morrison's co-conspirators were being arrested simultaneously across 3 states, his network of corruption collapsing even as he made his last desperate stand. The electromagnetic pulse device that Morrison activated sent shockwaves through Sterling Technologies' entire network infrastructure, his final act of revenge designed to cripple the company's operations, even if he couldn't profit from its destruction. "If I can't have it, then no one can," his voice boomed through failing speakers, as the building's lights flickered and emergency systems struggled to maintain basic operations. His technical expertise turned toward pure destruction. Rodriguez's team moved with military precision as they breached the server room's reinforced door, their tactical lights cutting through the smoke and sparks of Morrison's digital scorched earth campaign, revealing a man surrounded by the burning ruins of his own creation. Victoria followed them into the server room, her CEO training overridden by the need to confront the man who had been planning her murder while sharing Christmas dinners and celebrating company milestones, her anger tempered by the crushing weight of personal betrayal. Morrison stood defiant among the wreckage of Sterling Technologies' digital infrastructure, his expensive suit torn and his face streaked with soot, clutching a pistol that Rodriguez's team immediately identified as a threat requiring immediate neutralization. Maria remained in the doorway, her quiet presence a reminder of the courage that had prevented Morrison's plan from succeeding. Her daughter Lucy, sleeping peacefully at home, while her mother helped capture one of corporate America's most dangerous criminals. The server room's sprinkler system activated in response to the electrical fires, creating a surreal scene as Morrison faced the consequences of 15 years of carefully planned treachery, water and sparks cascading around him like the tears of the company he had tried to destroy. Rodriguez's negotiation training took over as he attempted to de-escalate the situation, his voice calm and professional, despite the weapon pointed in their direction and the millions of dollars in damage Morrison had already inflicted on Sterling Technologies' infrastructure. "It's over, James," Rodriguez said, his hands visible and non-threatening while his team maintained tactical positions around the server room's perimeter. "The money's been frozen, your co-conspirators are in custody, and every piece of evidence has been backed up to federal servers." Morrison's laugh was hollow and bitter as he realized that his years of planning had been undone not by corporate security or federal investigators, but by the simple human decency of a woman he had dismissed as inconsequential, a cleaning lady whose love for her daughter had motivated her to risk everything to save a stranger's life. Victoria stepped forward despite Rodriguez's protective gestures, her CEO authority intact, even in the smoking ruins of her company's digital heart, her voice carrying the weight of command that had built Sterling Technologies into an industry leader. "You were my friend, James," she said, her words cutting through the chaos with devastating simplicity. "I trusted you with my life, with my company, with everything that mattered to me, and you repaid that trust by trying to have me murdered." Maria watched this final confrontation between former friends with the quiet attention of someone who understood that sometimes the most profound betrayals come from the people we trust most completely. The server room's emergency lighting cast long shadows as Morrison finally lowered his weapon, the fight going out of him as he realized that his elaborate scheme had been destroyed by the courage of an invisible woman and the resilience of the friendship he had tried to exploit and ultimately destroy. The FBI tactical team that swarmed Sterling Technologies at 3:47 a.m. moved with the coordinated precision of a federal operation that had been months in the making, their presence transforming the corporate headquarters into a crime scene that would reshape the technology industry's understanding of internal threats. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead investigator specializing in corporate espionage, took Morrison into custody with the professional detachment of someone who had seen too many boardroom betrayals end in handcuffs and federal charges. "James Morrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corporate espionage, wire fraud, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." Her voice echoed through the smoke-filled server room as she read rights that Morrison had spent years believing he was too smart and too well-connected to ever hear. Victoria watched her former CFO and trusted friend being led away in restraints, his expensive suit torn and his face streaked with soot from the digital infrastructure he had destroyed in his final act of spite. Rodriguez coordinated with federal agents as they secured the building and began the complex process of documenting evidence that spanned multiple states and involved international banking crimes, corporate murder conspiracies, and technology theft on a scale that would require years to fully prosecute. Maria stood quietly beside Victoria, her cleaning uniform a stark reminder that the most crucial witness in this federal case was a single mother who had risked everything to save the life of a woman she had never formally met, but whose conversations she had overheard during 2 years of invisible night shifts. The emergency board meeting that convened at 6 a.m. in Sterling Technologies' backup conference facility became the most important corporate gathering in the company's history, as Victoria presented evidence of Morrison's betrayal to directors who struggled to process the scope of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed everything they had built together. The Blackstone merger was never a legitimate business opportunity, Victoria explained, her voice steady despite the emotional exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her as she detailed how their CFO had been systematically weakening the company to facilitate a hostile takeover funded by his own embezzlement. Board member Elizabeth Warren, a seasoned executive who had survived 3 decades of corporate warfare, stared at the evidence with the expression of someone who thought she had seen every possible form of betrayal until this morning's revelations redefined the limits of treachery. Rodriguez's preliminary damage assessment revealed that Morrison's electromagnetic pulse attack had caused significant but not irreparable harm to Sterling Technologies' infrastructure, with most critical data preserved on federal backup systems that Morrison hadn't known existed. Maria was formally introduced to the board as the employee whose courage and observational skills had prevented not just Victoria's assassination, but the complete destruction of Sterling Technologies and the jobs of 3,000 employees whose livelihoods had hung in the balance of one woman's desperate decision to speak up. The merger with Blackstone Industries was immediately terminated, with federal investigators revealing that the entire negotiation had been orchestrated by Morrison as part of his conspiracy to eliminate Victoria and seize control of Project Clearwater's revolutionary technology. Dr. Amanda Foster, Sterling Technologies' head of security architecture, presented evidence showing how Morrison's access to classified systems had compromised not just their company, but potentially dozens of other firms in their industry network, making this case a matter of national economic security rather than simple corporate crime. The media firestorm that erupted as news of the assassination attempt broke across business networks transformed Victoria Sterling from a respected CEO into a symbol of corporate resilience, and Maria Santos from an invisible janitor into an unlikely hero whose story captured the nation's imagination. CNN's Anderson Cooper led his evening broadcast with exclusive footage of Morrison being led away in handcuffs, while financial analysts scrambled to assess the broader implications of a corporate conspiracy that had involved murder, international money laundering, and industrial espionage at levels previously thought impossible in American business. Maria found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought, her dignity and quiet strength in interviews contrasting sharply with the calculated evil of the man she had helped bring to justice. Her story resonating with working families across the country who saw in her courage a validation of their own invisible contributions to American prosperity. Victoria used every media appearance to emphasize that Sterling Technologies' survival was due entirely to Maria's intervention, her public statements transforming a potential corporate disaster into a testament to the value of every employee, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. The FBI's Asset Recovery Division announced the seizure of over $847 million in cryptocurrency and traditional assets connected to Morrison's conspiracy, funds that would be returned to Sterling Technologies and used to strengthen the company's security infrastructure and employee protection programs. Rodriguez coordinated with international law enforcement agencies as the investigation revealed Morrison's connections to corporate espionage networks operating in 17 countries. His arrest triggering a cascade of prosecutions that would reshape global understanding of how organized crime had infiltrated legitimate business at the highest levels. The federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan became the center of national attention as Morrison's arraignment proceeded with charges that could result in life imprisonment without parole. His team of expensive defense attorneys struggling to contain a case where the evidence of guilt was overwhelming and the defendant had been caught literally red-handed destroying evidence. Victoria testified before the grand jury with the composed authority that had built her business empire. Her detailed account of 15 years of friendship and professional collaboration betrayed by systematic deception, providing prosecutors with the personal narrative that would make Morrison's crimes comprehensible to a jury. Maria's testimony, delivered in careful English that conveyed both her intelligence and her vulnerability, became the emotional centerpiece of the federal case as she described the fear that had kept her silent for months and the desperate love for her daughter that had finally motivated her to risk everything to save a stranger's life. The Department of Justice announced that Morrison's case would be prosecuted as a test of new federal statutes designed to address corporate terrorism and assassination conspiracies, making him potentially the first person in American history to face capital charges for corporate murder-for-hire schemes. Sterling Technologies' stock price, which had plummeted in the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt and server room attack, began a dramatic recovery as investors recognized that the company had not only survived a coordinated attack, but had emerged stronger and more secure than ever before. Rodriguez was promoted to Chief Security Officer and tasked with developing new protocols that would prevent similar infiltration of corporate leadership, his experience with Morrison's betrayal making him uniquely qualified to design systems that could detect threats from within the highest levels of corporate management. The international banking investigation revealed that Morrison's conspiracy had been funded by a network of shell companies and offshore accounts that stretched from the Cayman Islands to Singapore, with financial crimes prosecutors preparing cases that would take years to fully prosecute, but would ultimately reshape global banking regulations designed to prevent corporate terrorism financing. 6 months after that terrifying night in the parking garage, Maria Santos walked through the same corridors of Sterling Technologies with a confidence that would have been unimaginable during her years of invisible cleaning shifts, her tailored business suit and security badge marking her transformation from overlooked employee to one of the company's most trusted executives. The marble floors that she had once mopped in solitude now echoed with the purposeful stride of someone whose observational skills and intimate knowledge of the building's forgotten spaces had earned her the title of Chief Internal Security Analyst, a position created specifically to harness the unique perspective that had saved Victoria's life and the company's future. Her corner office on the 40th floor, with its panoramic view of the city she had once observed only through service elevator windows, served as headquarters for a revolutionary employee protection program that had become the industry standard for preventing internal corporate terrorism. Rodriguez had become her closest professional ally, their partnership built on mutual respect and the shared understanding that the most dangerous threats to any organization often come from within its highest ranks, disguised as loyalty and friendship. Victoria made a point of having coffee with Maria every Tuesday morning, their conversations ranging from security protocols to Maria's continuing education in corporate finance, a friendship built on the foundation of trust that had been forged in those desperate moments when a janitor's courage had saved a CEO's life. The employee handbook now included the Santos Protocol, a confidential reporting system that encouraged all workers, regardless of position, to report suspicious activities without fear of retaliation, transforming Maria's desperate midnight warning into institutional policy that protected thousands of employees across Sterling Technologies' global operations. Lucy Santos had blossomed in her new environment at the prestigious Whitmore Academy, her natural intelligence finally receiving the educational resources and opportunities that her mother's brave actions had secured. Her artwork now displayed proudly in Victoria's office alongside corporate awards and industry recognitions. The scholarship fund that Victoria had established in Lucy's name provided similar opportunities to the children of other Sterling Technologies employees, ensuring that the courage Maria had shown would ripple through generations of families who might never know how one woman's decision to speak up had transformed their futures. Maria's evening routine now included reviewing security reports and coordinating with federal agencies, her unique understanding of how invisible employees could observe sensitive information, making her invaluable to corporations across the industry seeking to prevent similar infiltration and betrayal. The small apartment where she and Lucy had lived in fear of deportation and economic uncertainty had been replaced by a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood, complete with a security system and the peace of mind that came from knowing that powerful people were now protecting rather than threatening her family. Victoria often reflected on how Maria's intervention had not only saved her life, but had forced her to examine the corporate culture that had allowed Morrison's conspiracy to flourish undetected, leading to comprehensive reforms in executive oversight and employee empowerment that had made Sterling Technologies stronger than ever before. The after-school program that Morrison had perverted into a surveillance operation had been completely restructured, with Maria serving on the board of directors and ensuring that children like Lucy would never again be used as leverage against their parents, transforming a tool of intimidation into a genuine community resource. The federal prosecution of James Morrison and his co-conspirators had concluded with convictions that sent shockwaves through corporate America. His life sentence, without possibility of parole, serving as a stark warning to executives who might consider similar betrayals of trust and human decency. Maria had testified with quiet dignity throughout the trial, her account of the intimidation and threats she had endured becoming a defining moment in the case that helped jurors understand the human cost of corporate terrorism and conspiracy. The $847 million in recovered assets had been used to establish the Sterling Santos Foundation, a research initiative dedicated to developing early detection systems for corporate fraud and internal threats, with Maria serving as a founding board member, despite her protests that she was still learning the complexities of high-level business operations. Victoria's leadership during the crisis had earned her recognition as CEO of the Year from multiple business publications, but she consistently redirected credit to Maria, emphasizing that true leadership meant recognizing and empowering the courage of others, rather than taking personal credit for survival that had depended entirely on someone else's bravery. The building's cleaning staff now received quarterly security briefings and were formally recognized as essential partners in maintaining corporate security, their unique access to sensitive areas and conversations making them valuable allies rather than potential threats to be intimidated into silence. Rodriguez's security protocols had been adopted by corporations worldwide, his experience with Morrison's betrayal providing the foundation for new industry standards that treated internal threats as seriously as external attacks, acknowledging that the greatest dangers often came from those with the most trusted access to sensitive information. The annual Sterling Technologies company meeting had become a celebration of the values that Maria's courage had helped define, with her keynote speech about the importance of speaking up against injustice serving as inspiration for employees who might otherwise feel powerless in the face of corporate hierarchy and intimidation. Lucy, now 9 years old and thriving academically, often visited her mother's office after school, her drawings of castles with strong gates replaced by artwork depicting bridges that connected different worlds, her young imagination grasping the transformation that her mother's bravery had created for their family and thousands of others. The cleaning staff throughout Sterling Technologies wore patches on their uniforms reading Santos Protocol Observer, a designation that carried respect and recognition rather than invisibility, acknowledging their role as the eyes and ears that helped protect everyone who worked in the building. Maria's immigration status had been permanently resolved through a special federal program designed to protect witnesses in corporate terrorism cases, her family's security guaranteed by the same government that had once been used to threaten them through Morrison's manipulation of federal agencies. Victoria's brother David, who served on Sterling Technologies' board of directors, often remarked that Maria's intervention had not only saved his sister's life, but had prevented the destruction of their family's legacy and the livelihoods of everyone who depended on the company's success. The marble lobby that had once intimidated Maria with its display of corporate wealth and power now featured a bronze plaque reading, "In recognition of all employees whose courage protects this company," her story serving as a permanent reminder that heroism often comes from the most unexpected sources, and that the strength of any organization lies in the character of every person who contributes to its mission. The transformation was complete. A single mother who had once cleaned these floors in fear and silence had become a guardian of corporate integrity, her journey from invisible janitor to respected executive proving that in America, courage and integrity could still triumph over corruption and intimidation, and that sometimes the most important voice in the room belongs to the person everyone else has forgotten to notice.